So, while we normally talk about specific things from various franchises across science fiction on this channel, today I want to talk about something a little bit different. I want to talk about something that really is bugging me that we've seen across multiple different science fiction franchises and pieces of science fiction. Let's talk about why we need to stop sending space shuttles to the moon. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. Now, I'd like to start this out by saying that while I am a huge fan of science fiction, I'm actually an equally large fan of real-world spaceflight. I stay up till crazy hours of the night to watch rocket launches live on live streams online. I keep up to date with news involving SpaceX and NASA and our quest to explore the stars here in real life, so I feel at least somewhat qualified to talk about what the space shuttle can and can't do, and that's why it bugs me so much when I see science fiction sending it to the moon. Before we really talk about why this bothers me, let's talk about what the Space Shuttle is. The Space Shuttle was ultimately a reusable replacement designed to replace the Apollo spacecraft, which was very expensive to fly. After all, after every flight, the entire Apollo system had to be completely replaced. So the idea behind the Space Shuttle was to build something simple and reusable for getting large payloads into low Earth orbit. It ultimately flew from 1981 to 2011 in 135 separate missions, and there were 5 shuttles built in total: Columbia, Challenger, Discovery, Atlantis, and Endeavour. The shuttle, however, did have 2 major accidents: the destruction of the Challenger during launch and the loss of Columbia during re-entry, which highlighted the flaws in this vessel, which ultimately resulted in it being one of the deadliest spacecraft ever to fly, killing a total of 14 crew members over the course of its career, and led to its retirement in 2011 following the Columbia disaster, and its replacement by more modern spacecraft, things like the SpaceX Crew Dragon, the Boeing CST-100, and Orion. And while during its career the Space Shuttle became an iconic symbol of American spaceflight, it does have some very practical limitations. In the grand scheme of spaceflight, it really couldn't go very far, and there are some very key reasons for this, the biggest being its thermal protection system. You see, spacecraft designed to go to the moon and to go to deep space have what is called an ablative heat shield. This is a complex piece of technology that essentially takes the superheated plasma that forms outside the vehicle as it's re-entering Earth's atmosphere and absorbs that heat before fracturing away and carrying the heat away with it. Ablative heat shields are used on most manned spacecraft throughout history, from the Apollo missions to the moon to the Orion spacecraft being designed by NASA and SpaceX's Crew Dragon. But the Space Shuttle had something a little bit different. You see, due to the Space Shuttle's size, complexity, and the intent to reuse the vehicle, an ablative heat shield wasn't really practical. Instead, they opted to use something called the thermal protection system. This replaced the heat shield with a network of ceramic tiles. These tiles didn't work quite the same as an ablative heat shield. The tiles would absorb the heat and then stay attached to the shuttle, and would be replaced after they had endured a certain amount of stress. This system of tiles allowed them to build a thermal protection system that could effectively protect a large spacecraft like the Space Shuttle Orbiter. However, it did have some flaws. Unlike ablative heat shields, there were upper limits to the temperatures it could endure, and as a result, the shuttle almost always entered the atmosphere at a very shallow angle instead of coming basically straight down like some of the Apollo spacecraft. Ultimately, if you were to put a space shuttle through the amount of stress required of a spacecraft coming back from the moon, it would likely fail on re-entry, with its thermal protection system simply being overloaded. But that wasn't the only reason why the shuttle couldn't go to the moon. The other reason is propulsion. The Space Shuttle is massive. It's one of the largest spacecraft to have flown in space so far. And its weight reflects that. It's also one of the heaviest manned spacecraft ever flown. But its engines aren't that large. When you look at the back of a space shuttle, the 3 main engines you see igniting on launch are actually basically useless once the vessel reaches orbit. These 3 RS-25 main engines feed fuel off of the large orange external fuel tank, and once that fuel tank is separated, these engines are shut down for the rest of the mission. Instead, these 2 smaller engines on either side are what the shuttle uses to navigate around in space, and as far as a thrust-to-weight ratio, these engines aren't that great. They use a totally different type of fuel that's stored in a totally different type of system. And this fuel ultimately wouldn't last very long if they were carrying out a mission to the moon. So while the Space Shuttle is a fascinating and remarkable spacecraft that was really capable at doing what it was designed to do, which is carrying things into low Earth orbit and ultimately building space stations, which it did phenomenally, it was never designed or really capable of going any further than that. So when I see a show like For All Mankind or Moonfall launching a space shuttle to the moon, I roll my eyes a little bit. Even with significant modifications to the technology, it just always makes sense to use something more like an Apollo or the upcoming Orion spacecraft to go to and from the moon. But there is one tidbit that bodes pretty well for the future of a space shuttle-like spacecraft actually being able to go into deep space at some point in our future. Major aerospace companies, most notably SpaceX, are working very hard to develop thermal protection systems that can protect larger spacecraft, specifically the SpaceX Starship, a vessel being designed to allow us to colonize the entirety of the solar system, theoretically. And the reason why SpaceX's Starship is so fascinating and so sort of intriguing to me is it seems to be a natural precursor to the colonization of Mars, very similar to the way we see Mars colonized in The Expanse. And if you'd like to learn about how Mars was colonized in The Expanse and the founding of the Martian Congressional Republic, I'll leave a link up here to my video all about that. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments whether you think this is a minor thing that I'm making too big of a deal out of, or does it bug you too when you see a space shuttle sent to the moon or Mars? Am I alone in being bothered by this, or are other people also kind of a little bit annoyed by the space shuttle's universal deployment as a spacecraft to go anywhere? And last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.